Today, we'll be going over the macro that changed Deepwoken forever. From players breaking federal laws, to the chase ban of multiple players, to being used to defeat the #1 guild in Deepwoken, this macro has truly done it all, and has left an everlasting impact within the Deepwoken competitive community. Today, we'll be going over the story of the Akai macro. To understand the story of this macro, we must go to where it originated, a Deepwoken guild known as Akai. Akai would be created September 17th, 2023 by a player known as Myzron, with the goal of becoming one of the top guilds in the Deepwoken community, to the likes of Lancelot, Chapter, Percival, or OG. Unfortunately, for the most part of Akai's lifespan, they would be seen as a perma-freshy guild. It wasn't until Akai would have a generational run against other guilds in wars, dropping off the guilds that would see them as fodder, and in the past would disrespect them and make fun of them. Unfortunately though, this triumphant story of an underdog, perma-freshy guild defeating all the top guilds wasn't without controversy. About 6 months ago, a player within Akai known as Gojo would start developing cutting-edge macro, which would be known infamously as the Akai macro. Upon its conception, the macro didn't really do much that other macros couldn't already do. It wasn't until its later versions that we got to see the extent of what a macro could actually do. Since in most competitive games, macros are straight out banned and strictly prohibited, since it provides an unfair advantage to players. And players who are caught using macros in other games end up getting banned. Unlike other games, this is Deepwoken, the land of the macros. So Gojo was able to push the Akai macro as far as he could. It got to the point this macro was able to do techs that no normal player could do. One of them hilariously being something called emote casting, which allowed players to emote and cast mantras at the same time. They could perfect roll cast, they can use reinforce without having to press F to make it green, among a bunch of other things. But the biggest issue that this macro provided to players was a parry bar, or a parry indicator, essentially letting you know when you can parry again without being on CD, which is a huge advantage to players that don't have it. So now that I explained to you what the Akai macro was and what it did, let's flash back to the point where Akai would defeat the #1 guild at the time, known as Chapter, in a huge upset win that changed the community forever. The date was September 7th, 2024, in a server known as Deepleague, where two guilds were about to war. One guild was seen as the favorite to win, an undefeated guild for the past 2 years. Since verse 1, this guild has never lost a 5v5 war. This guild would be known as Chapter. Chapter has always been seen as some of the best players in a 1v1. They might not always been the best gankers, but when it came to sheer 1v1 capabilities, Chapter always reigned on top. On the other side, we have a relatively new guild known as Akai, which had a notable win over Percival in a close match with OG Sin, but on paper stood no chance against Chapter. This mismatch in the eyes of the community gave Chapter a false sense of confidence. They thought that they would just steamroll Akai like every other guild that challenged them to war in the previous years. This overconfidence would be the downfall of Chapter, since they allowed Akai to pick the servers they were going to war in. Akai, unlike Chapter, came prepared. They knew exactly what they were doing. They would pick Texas servers knowing they had 3 central players and Chapter would be using only east players. Chapter, being so full of themselves, were willing to play with a ping disadvantage. And slowly, Akai started stacking the odds in their favor. With the Akai macro, a ping advantage, and a deceptively good roster, the chances of Akai winning only became higher. Famously said in the book War of Art, "There is no greater danger than underestimating your opponent." Sun Tzu. Akai would beat Chapter. The 2-year undefeated streak will be shattered. The community was left speechless. The closest Chapter ever got to losing a match was one member dying. Akai even beating Chapter 1 round would have been impressive. To beat them to this degree was absurd. This is like prime Mike Tyson losing to Buster Douglas in the late 90s with a 42-1 odds. Akai has officially done what a lot of guilds could only dream of doing. At this point, everyone thought it was over. Akai would run into the sunset, officially crowned as the new #1 guild. They would prove all the doubters, haters, the people that didn't believe they would amount to anything in the Deepwoken community, all wrong, and ride into the sunset, being the triumphant underdog of the community. Unfortunately, that's not where this story ends. Akai, upon flexing their win, talking their shit, after doing something that nobody believed they could do, would end up posting a video to celebrate their historic moment. And this would be where everything came crashing down. This was because, unbeknownst to everyone, nobody knew that Akai Macro even existed up until now. It wasn't until in this video that they posted that people would even catch wind of it existing. Eventually, all the guilds that Akai previously beat would start talking about the Akai Macro. And eventually, it would get leaked. This would cause the community to riot, since people deemed it as exploits. People saw it as unethical to use in a competitive scene, which wasn't wrong. Even official Deepwoken testers would deem it as exploits. And this wasn't even the worst part. The Akai Macro had a built-in zip bomb feature. This essentially meant anyone that wasn't whitelisted by the creator of the Akai Macro would get their computer immediately shut off. For most people, this wasn't a problem, but if you ran a lower-end computer, it could cause permanent damage to your PC. This type of feature would be deemed as malware. And for those that don't know, causing malware to be installed on someone's computer is a criminal offense for which you could face state and federal charges.
That's fucking illegal.
So we went from a guild having a beautiful underdog story to arguably having one of the biggest controversies within the community in the matter of a week. All cause one of the war roster members on Akai made a video. After the following days of the situation coming to light, the creator of the Akai Macro would get chase banned for putting malware within the Akai Macro. He would try to appeal this chase ban, but would obviously be denied. Even though technically there isn't any rule saying you can't spread malwares on people's computers, the mods would just laugh at the situation and still chase ban him, since he broke a federal law. All of Akai's recent wars would be voided and deemed a no contest. So that infamous war they had with Chapter would be nullified, and Chapter would return to being undefeated. A rematch would be scheduled, but would never come to fruition due to people ganking the wars, and Akai's war roster would eventually disband. The macro would be deemed non-bannable by Archmage and mods, so anyone that was caught using the macro would be fine. And the final thing that came from this whole situation was Archmage himself adding an Akai macro feature to the UI of Deepwoken in the form of a little meter right above your posture bar. So next time you guys hop on Deepwoken and see that posture bar letting you know when you can parry again, you now know the origin of where it came from and how it came to be.